Okay, I'm Kenneth Hite, for those who wandered in here by accident looking for the Mech Warrior tournament. I've been a full-time game designer since about 1996-97. I've been contributing stuff one way or the other for about 5 years before that. And of course, I've been a gamer since AD&D fell into my life in 1977. So with the Monster Manual, before they even came out with the other two books, I got the Monster Manual. It's like, whatever this is, I want to do this for the rest of my life. And don't say things you don't mean when you're 12, I guess is the moral of that story. So I have been designing role-playing games and writing role-playing game material professionally for the last, 20 years, give or take now. I've been running games since 1977, as previously mentioned, so I don't know if you guys are here to hear about GMing or game design or both, but if we've got a strong preponderance one way or the other, that would help. So who here, given that they are forced to listen to me, would rather hear me talk about game design as opposed to GMing? A smattering, a literal smattering. But GMing, who would rather hear that? All right, so it's about equal, so we'll talk about whichever one. One of my GMing principles and one of my game design principles are basically the same principle. And the principle is start with Earth. If you can, in any way, set your game or your game product on Earth, set it in a world where the players or the customers will recognize what you're doing. So if you write the book and you say, turns out, and I don't want to scare anyone here, Kragar the Liberator was a drow. People will say, all right, I don't care. I didn't care when you started the sentence, I don't care anymore now. If you say Abraham Lincoln was a drow, then people are like, okay, now I'm interested to see how you back that up, because they know who Abraham Lincoln is. They buy in. They have a connection to that. So if you get farther with King Arthur or Abraham Lincoln or Hitler or whoever, then you get with some guy you made up. And trust me, no matter how many words you write explaining why Kragar the Liberator is better than Abraham Lincoln, no one will read those words either. And so therefore it is incumbent upon you as a designer and as someone who's running to start with something that people have previously bought into. Now, as a game designer, that's harder to do with a previously published property. You can't just say, I'm going to walk out the door and design me a Game of Thrones game, or I'm going to walk out the door and design me a Star Trek game. I have, but that's because the people who've gone to the trouble of buying the licenses have said to me, come design these games, and then I did that. But in your home game, obviously, you can say, we're going to do Star Trek only, we're going to do a Star Trek based on the awesome militaristic Federation in yesterday's Enterprise, not the crummy, stupid lounge chair Federation that we see in the rest of Next Generation. Or we're going to do Star Trek, but we're going to set it before the original series. We're going to do Captain Pike's era, or whatever we're going to say. You can get that same buy-in as a GM. As a designer, if you actually want to run a world, a science fiction world, or you actually want to write a fantasy world, and you want to have that feel, then you should keep that touchstone in mind, right? So if you're saying, I'm writing a space adventure game, but it's the Yesterday's Enterprise space adventure game, or Captain Pike era space adventure game, keep those in mind and keep going back to that material and draw from it. Draw it either thematically, draw it methodologically, carve off names so you can have the up and coming sort of hero in your universe might be Captain Sarissa or Captain Javelin or something, and then people will say, oh, I get who that's supposed to be, or it could be Christopher Pine, you know, and they're oh, I get you, you're playing on the name of the new Captain Kirk, but you're actually, I see what you're doing there. And so you can do other things that will signal the existence of someone who is technically under copyright or technically doesn't belong to you, but will still provide some of that same buy-in. And you can look at Alan Moore in League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. Once he gets into the later 20th century and he has to start working with people who are owned by people, you can see the way that he shows you James Bond without ever calling him James Bond. You can look at other characters and the way that they've shown you something without calling them something. You can build a pretty great universe, either for your players or for your customers, by knowing what it is you're selling and selling it to them, providing it to them in as concentrated and as clear a form, because your goal always is to get their buy-in, get them to walk through that door. Either you walk through your door as a player or walk through your door as a customer and buy in on your setting. And that's even true if you're doing a big, broad, generic thing, like Knights Black Agents. This is spies versus vampires, and to make it as widely acceptable as possible, the vampires are entirely modular. You can build those from anything to anything, so you can build everything from the space vampires of Colin Wilson to Dracula to the Strain guys to the Vampiri from Necroscope. They can all be built out of the blocks of this. And the super spies are, again, from any background. They might be ex-CIA, they might be burned MI6, they might be former Mossad who are on the run, any kind of background. But when I was writing the game, I was always thinking about the middle fight in the Middle Bourne movie. That was the image that was in my head, was that Eskrima fight in, I think his name is Marcus's living room.
Yes.
And he grabs up the magazine, finally rolls it up, and he just kills him with a rolled up magazine. And in my mind, that rolled up magazine is a stake, but everything else is the same, right? That's what this whole game is about that, 5-minute, 4-minute fight scene. And so everything that I wrote had to point toward it, and that's by, word choice, right? You use action verbs, you don't use passive verbs. You use motion verbs, not standing still verbs. You keep the sentences shorter than I normally keep my sentences. If you've read my stuff before, you notice that I'm a prolix writer, but in this, lots of periods, lots of telegraphic prose. It gets a little less so in the vampire section, again, on purpose. But I'm always aiming, I always have a default in mind. I have a goal. And the world of what do I want to say, universal game systems is such that, first of all, they're all free to use, so you don't need to invent your own. Second of all, if you're inventing a universal game system, or you're inventing your own game engine for whatever you're doing, do it based on a property that you want to move. Because what gets people through the door is not, oh my god, I can roll different sorts of dice. What gets them to the door is, I can play this world that I see on the cover, right? And so Fate, of course, if you look at Fate now, on the cover, it's like every other universal system. It has 3 incompatible heroes doing nothing. If that had been the first book for Fate, there would not be 20,000 Fate players. But Fate comes out with Spirit of the Century, and that's got a gorilla fighting a guy on the back of a biplane. It's like, everyone wants to play in the game of gorillas fighting guys on the back of biplanes. Or at least if they didn't, they have an option. They have a door in. And so when you play Spirit of the Century, you know what you're getting. You're getting that very narrow, it's not even all pulp. It's a very narrow subgenre of pulp. And Lenny and Rob are thinking about this very narrow concept. And so when they're doing Fate, and they redid Fate like 3 times before they got to Spirit, because they're always saying, how is this getting that gorilla on back of that biplane? And if it isn't, if it's just taking too long to get the gorilla, or when he gets there, there's nothing to do, or when he gets there, he might as well be on a freaking, coal barge for all the action that the game system is promoting. They're designing everything to get to that moment. And the reason that Fate is successful now is because they created something that could support all these other things, but they didn't go in and say, oh, we're going to build a universal game system. They started with the universal game system. They started with Fudge. And they said, how do we make Fudge more interesting to play? Fudge is a garage full of car parts, right? And it's a great garage, and it's full of great car parts. But Stephen O'Sullivan, God bless him, and to a lesser extent Anne, said, well, you got a garage full of car parts. Why should I build you a Maserati? You go build your own Maserati, or Porsche, or Dodge Rambler, or whatever you want to build. Just don't bother me about it. And Lenny and Rob say, no, we want to at least start you out. We want to give you a chassis and some wheels and a motor, and say, you can paint it whatever color you want, but this will get you down the track. And so that's what they did. And I think that if you are producing a game, it's incumbent on you to not assume the interest of your readers or players, but to create the interest by making something that someone would walk through the door for. There are a couple of other different 101 level tips, but that is the 001 level tip that I would have. Is, certainly no one owes you a read, no one owes you a play. your job is to get them to the table or to the point of purchase, and that is not going to be done by them liking you and knowing that you're a good person. That is going to be done by them looking at the cover of your game book and saying, oh look, that's Jason Bourne and that's a horrible vampire. I know what this game is about. And that's what this game is about, even though in theory you could be playing James Bond versus different vampires, or Smiley versus Edward Cullen. I mean, I'm not in charge of how you use the game. They can all fit in there. But again, you know, Day After Ragnarok, this was written to be Conan the Barbarian, swords and submachine guns, and sorcery. So what have we got? We've got a guy, he's got his crew cut, he's a little G.I. Joe looking guy, and he's fighting a giant snake. That tells you what this world is. And then I made sure that there are fighter planes up there so that everyone knows what's going on, and that he's got a submachine gun. That's what the game is. Everything else that I built out, all that other work, has to come through this cover. And this cover doesn't come because I wrote to the cover. This is not Carmen Infantino's comics era. This is me writing the world, and then we decide what's going to sell the world. And again, you talk about having an image, because this is an entire world. I got to cheat and have two images, but one of the images is Robert E. Howard, Conan the Barbarian. Everything that isn't like Conan the Barbarian gets stripped away. And again, when you talk about things that are currently owned by somebody, Thoth Amon is not actually owned by the Swedes. They think they own him. Robert E. Howard Conan Properties has a very aggressive legal team. So in Day After Ragnarok, he is Jehuti Amun, which is the Egyptian version of Thoth Amon, but he is recognizably Thoth Amon. He has Thoth Amon's backstory, he has all of Thoth Amon's powers, he has Thoth Amon's ring of Set, and there are, you know, anyone who looks in here, people online went through and they said, I'm going to find all the Robert E. Howard references in Day After Ragnarok, and they post lists of them, because they know what I'm doing, and that then gives them a door in, because they've read Howard. And it's set in our world in 1948 after the fall of the Midgard Serpent. So they want to say, oh, I wonder what happened to Miami. Oh, it got flooded, and that, I guess we could have guessed that part. But they want to know what happened to Japan, or they want to know what happened to this or that. So the other half of that world is the world in which Britain is inexplicably important, which is the end of pulp, the sort of post-pulp unit, James Bond, Professor Quatermass, that universe. And so the other half of the universe for me became Professor Quatermass. And again, Professor Quatermass is owned by the BBC, and they're probably big pains about the fact that they own him. So he is Professor Childermass in here. But again, anyone who knows anything about Professor Quatermass can recognize him. And I wrote the British Empire all around what makes Professor Quatermass more likely. So all the decisions have to go towards, how do I get to Professor Quatermass? And that's what's in there. So that's basically my sort of GMing and game design unified field theory, is start with Earth and build towards something that is recognizable. And it has to be recognizable not just to the punters, but to you. You have to care about it. If you don't give a rat's ass about Robert E. Howard, you're not going to write a good Robert E. Howard game. If you don't, I mean, that's why I didn't write the Game of Thrones game, is that the guy who had the license at the time comes to me, this is before Chris had it, and he comes to me and he says, we have the Game of Thrones license, what do you want to do? And I said, well, let me read the first book and I'll get back to you. And I got about 100 pages in the first book, and I said, I am one of the people in the world for whom this would be a much better book if it was set in Britain, not Westeros. And it was actually the Wars of the Roses instead of the Wars of the Roses fanfic. And I said, I don't actually care what happens to the rest of this book. That means I'm not going to care about the property. That means I'm going to be terrible at writing for the property. Conversely, I have loved Star Trek since I was 2 when I first saw it. And so writing Star Trek was always great. I would type the words Romulans and think, I'm getting paid to write the word Romulans. And that was great. At some point that does wear off, and that's when you want to leave and stop doing it. But at the time it was really great energy. So again, if you're running a game, this is true at the table, your players can also sense if you are going through the motions. If you don't care about your world, there's no reason that the players have to care about the world. I mean, again, we're under different social pressures as a GM than I am as a writer. But if you don't care about the world that you're running, you're not going to run it as well. And you have to care about it not in a you'll get it wrong if you touch it way, which is a perfectly legitimate way to care about things. It's the way that my good friend Steve Long cares about Tolkien. But we have to care about it in a, I want to welcome you in to touch it and change it and see how you react to it way. But if you don't have that missionary attitude, you're not going to be as effective at the table. And so if you're just opening the thing and saying, well, we're all going to run through the Studying of the Hill Giants, and you don't care about the Studying of the Hill Giants, your players are not going to care about the Studying of the Hill Giants. They may care about the mechanical, tactical qualities of playing D&D because those are great qualities, but they're not going to care about the part that you're allegedly bringing. I mean, if all you are there to do is be a mechanical dice roller who decides which orcs run away, there are many better things that do that better than you do, including other GMs, but also including the internet. So you have to, I think, certainly in this year of grace 2015, you have to bring something to the table that you care about, that you are passionate about, interested in, want to explore together. And it doesn't mean that you have to present a fully fledged novelistic story. It's often better that you do not present a fully fledged novelistic story because you can get caught up in how the ending is supposed to be. And in an iterative, collaborative, interactive art form like role-playing, that is also a mistake. But it's better that you care what the end is than you don't care what the beginning is, certainly. Let's see. There are other sorts of 101 type things that I can talk about. I don't necessarily know where you guys are, what you're interested in, but I'll just mention real fast that the most important thing that you can do at the game table is to understand and be aware that this is a collaborative process. And that is not just you, the GM, but it's also everybody. That if the guy's not there to play the game, don't invite him to play the game, right? If you go out to the movies with 5 friends and one of them is always talking during the movies, don't invite them to the movies. I don't have to tell you that. No one would ever go on a message board and say, I can't get Chad to stop talking at the movies. How do I get him to stop? Like, don't bring Chad to the movies. It's like everyone understands that after, middle school. But in role-playing, for some reason, for weird social effect reasons that I can't even begin to parse, we still, at age 50, I hear people say, how do I get Chad to stop being a dick at the game? It's like, don't play with Chad. Chad is a dick. Chad may be great at, you go out and you watch a baseball game, or you go out and you do any other kind of thing with Chad. He's solid, he's there, he knows where the best steakhouse is. Many good reasons to hang out with Chad, but if he can't play role-playing games, if he's physically incapable or mentally incapable, don't invite him. And that solves so many problems that I go to panels or whatever, and they're like, how do I stop Chad? It's like, don't bring Chad. That's how you stop Chad. The old doctor, it hurts when I do this. Stop doing that. That's not just good comedy, it's also good advice. So I guess that's my 101 for at the gaming table. Obviously there's plenty of 201 and 301 type stuff I can talk about. I can talk about plenty of other how to design this, how to design that. But I would rather see what you guys want to talk about and then sort of feed off what you're interested in as opposed to going the other way. So if anyone's got a question, comment, whatever, yeah.
Well, I actually have two, but the first one, you mentioned, it was funny because you were pointing out both the covers on both Night's Black Agent and on, was it?
The After Ragnarok.
Right. And one of the things that struck me is in talking with authors over the years, art seems to be the thing they never have that kind of level of input on. So and since before this whole chat started, you made the joke about novels versus gaming authoring. Mm-hmm. Do you find that as a distinction, that the level of input you get as a gaming author would vary or is much greater than the level of input you'd get on the non-writing parts of the business than you would as a novelist?
I think that a lot of that is publisher by publisher. I am sure, because there are many, many publishers out there, that there are conventional publishers who wouldn't think of doing a cover without running it past the author. That said, and I know that there have been role-playing game publishers who have not cared one whit what I think about the cover. But in both of these cases, Simon is a very conscientious publisher in a lot of ways, and no one tell him that he's not doing things like everyone else does, because if I ever find out, right now he thinks that when you're in his city, he has to cover your bar tab. That hasn't been true for publishers since the 70s. So just keep that under your hat.
Yes.
But Simon and I went back and forth a great deal about this cover, about what is it going to look like and what's going to be on it and what fonts do I want and things like that, in ways that have not happened to me traditionally. With Day After Ragnarok, it was the Atomic Overmind is just Hal and me.
Oh.
So Hal is like, what should the cover be? And I said it should be a Conan, but with a buzz cut, a World War II military buzz cut, carrying a Thompson gun and a fighting knife, going after a 10-foot long serpent with thunder it's actually the jet, the Meteor jets, the F-80s, I think they are. Yeah, but they're and have those somewhere in the sky. And I said, oh, and also, and it is easier to tell on the Savage Worlds because the trade dress is different. Also, ideally, it should look like it's a Lancer paperback that you just found in the garage.
Like a dime store or whatever.
Yeah, right.
Does it also help then that a lot of the gaming industry publishers, especially now, are themselves, it's not like in big market publishing of, for example, novels, you're not going to find that the publishers were novelists, but in gaming industry publishing, a lot of these folks started as gamers and gaming authors.
Yeah. I think in game publishing, there are plenty of game publishers who I've worked with who, if they did start as authors, either outsourced the graphic design to somebody else, which is generally a good idea anyway, or they have gotten large and successful enough that they can't micromanage and probably shouldn't micromanage. I've certainly had no problems with some of the covers that I've gotten, for example, for my GURPS books. Those are all great, and I had no input in them whatsoever. But Steve he had Phil Reed, I think was his art director at the time when I was doing GURPS Horror, and Phil knew what a good horror cover. I didn't have to tell Phil how to put something scary on the cover. So those worked out really well. For example, Chris Shy and I are friends, so it was like, oh, Chris Shy's doing my cover? Great. Whatever he wants to do will be awesome.
Right.
Thank you, fans, for joining us for another episode of The Nerdstravaganza. If you'd like more Ganza goodness, why not subscribe to our channel? Visit our homepage, follow us on Twitter, and like us on Facebook.